Would you like a flower, sir?
No, thank you, son. But please sit and have some soup.
Really? Thank you so much.
Every night at exactly 9 p.m., the richest man in the city sat alone at the same restaurant table. He never brought his family. He never brought his friends. And strangely, he always ordered the cheapest meal on the menu. Nobody understood why. Until one freezing night, a poor 12-year-old boy walked up to him and asked a question that would change the billionaire's life forever. The boy looked at him and said, "Sir, if you're so rich, why do you look so sad?" The billionaire froze. Because nobody had ever been brave enough to ask him that. His name was Edward Sterling. At 62 years old, Edward was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. His company owned luxury hotels, shopping centers, apartment buildings, and several technology companies. He lived in a mansion so large that it had more rooms than most people had ever seen in their entire lives. He owned several cars. He had a private jet. He had people working for him around the clock. If Edward wanted something, he could usually buy it. But there was one thing his billions could never purchase: peace. Every evening, when the sun disappeared behind the city skyline, Edward would leave his mansion alone. His driver would take him downtown. But instead of going to one of his expensive restaurants, Edward would walk into a small family-owned restaurant called the Golden Spoon. The restaurant wasn't luxurious. The tables were old. The walls needed painting. The chairs made noise whenever someone moved. But Edward liked it there. He always sat at the same table near the window. And every night, he ordered the same meal. A bowl of soup. A piece of bread. And a glass of water. That was it. For a man worth billions, it seemed strange. But there was a reason. Years earlier, Edward had owned a completely different kind of life. He had been married to a woman named Margaret. They had one son, Daniel. Daniel was everything Edward had ever wanted in a child. He was kind. He was intelligent. And unlike his father, Daniel didn't care much about money. When Daniel was young, he would often tell his father, "Dad, one day I want to help people who don't have what we have." Edward would smile and tell him, "You can do anything you want." But as Edward's company grew, so did his obsession with business. He worked longer hours. He traveled constantly. He missed birthdays. He missed school events. He missed dinners. And every time Daniel asked him to slow down, Edward would say the same thing. "I'm doing all of this for our future." But Daniel didn't want a bigger future. He wanted his father. Then one night, everything changed. Daniel was 24 years old when he died in a car accident while returning home from a charity event. Edward never recovered. And from that day forward, he became a different man. He stopped celebrating. He stopped attending parties. He stopped seeing most of his friends. And every night, he sat at the same restaurant table. Because that was where he and Daniel had eaten together during one of their last evenings. There was always an empty chair across from him. And Edward never allowed anyone to sit there. One cold winter evening, Edward sat at his usual table. Snow was beginning to fall outside. He looked across the table at the empty chair. For a moment, he imagined Daniel sitting there. Then he heard a voice. "Sir?" Edward looked up. Standing beside the table was a 12-year-old boy. His clothes were old. His shoes were worn. And he carried a small plastic bag in one hand. Edward frowned. "What do you want?" The boy hesitated. "Nothing, sir." "Then why are you standing here?" The boy pointed toward the empty chair. "Can I sit there?" Edward immediately shook his head. "No." The boy nodded. "Okay." He started walking away. Then Edward looked at him again. Something about the boy reminded him of Daniel. Not his appearance. His eyes. There was something honest about them. "Wait," Edward said. The boy turned around. "You can sit." The boy slowly pulled out the chair. But instead of sitting down, he asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" Edward stared at him. "No." The boy looked at the empty chair. "Then why do you keep looking at it?" Edward didn't answer. The boy finally sat down. "My name is Noah," he said. Edward nodded. "Edward." Noah smiled. "You come here every night?" Edward looked surprised. "How do you know?" "I sell flowers outside." He pointed toward the restaurant window. "I've seen you." Edward looked outside. There was a small flower basket near the entrance. The boy had been there before. Edward asked, "Where are your parents?" Noah's smile disappeared. "My mother is sick." "And your father?" "He left." Edward became quiet. Noah looked at Edward's untouched soup. "You're not eating." "I'm not hungry." Noah looked at him for a moment. Then he asked the question. "Sir, if you're so rich, why do you look so sad?" Edward almost laughed. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. He could have become angry. He could have told the boy to leave. Instead, he said, "Because I had everything, and still lost the person who mattered most." Noah looked at the empty chair. "Your son?" Edward's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "You look at that chair like someone is sitting there." For the first time in years, Edward started crying. Not loudly. Just a few tears. He quickly wiped them away. But Noah had already seen them. Edward told Noah about Daniel. He told him about his success. His company. His mansion. His money. And finally, he told him the truth. "I spent my entire life trying to give my family everything." Noah listened carefully. Edward continued. "But I didn't realize they didn't need everything." He looked at the empty chair. "They needed me." Noah was silent. Then he said, "My mother says something similar." Edward looked at him. "What does she say?" "She says the best thing you can give someone isn't money." "What is it?" "Your time." Edward looked down. Those two words hit him harder than anything anyone had said in years. Your time. He had billions. But he couldn't buy back 1 minute with his son. The next evening, Edward returned
Would you
to
like
the
a
golden
flower,
spoon.
sir?
But something
No,
was
thank
different.
you, son. But please,
He
sit
brought
and have
another
some
bowl
soup.
of soup.
Really? Thank you so
And
much.
this time, he ordered 2. One for himself. One for Noah. The boy arrived shortly afterward. Edward smiled. "I ordered your dinner." Noah looked surprised. "For me?" "Yes." Noah sat down. They ate together. For the first time in years, Edward wasn't alone at his table. And something strange happened. He laughed. It was a small laugh. But it was genuine. The restaurant owner watched from behind the counter. He hadn't heard Edward laugh in years. Over the next few weeks, Edward and Noah became friends. Edward learned that Noah's mother, Sarah, was seriously ill and struggling to pay for treatment. Noah sold flowers every evening to help. Edward wanted to immediately solve the problem. He could have paid the medical bills in seconds. But he remembered something. Daniel had never wanted his father to simply throw money at problems. He wanted people to be given opportunities. So Edward asked Noah, "What does your mother dream of doing?" Noah thought for a moment. "She used to bake cakes." Edward smiled. "Was she good?" "The best." "Then maybe she should bake again." Edward quietly began making arrangements. He purchased a small empty shop near the Golden Spoon. He had it renovated. But he didn't put his name on it. He didn't want Noah's mother to know who was helping. The shop became a small bakery. And Edward arranged for Sarah to receive medical treatment. But he didn't simply give her money. He gave her a chance to rebuild her life. 1 year after Noah first met Edward, something unexpected happened. Edward became seriously ill. He knew he didn't have much time left. So he wrote a letter. But it wasn't for his lawyers. It wasn't for his business partners. It wasn't for his family. It was for Noah. The letter said, "Noah, when I first met you, I thought you were a poor boy who needed help. I was wrong. You were the one who helped me. You reminded me that I was still capable of caring. You reminded me that money isn't the same thing as wealth. And you reminded me of the son I lost. If you ever become successful, don't make the mistake I made. Don't spend your entire life chasing things that can't love you back. Use whatever you have to make someone's life better. That is the only kind of wealth that survives after we are gone." When Edward died, the newspapers reported that the billionaire had left behind an enormous fortune. His business partners expected millions. His distant relatives expected properties. His lawyers expected complicated legal battles. But Edward had changed his will. He left his company to a charitable foundation. He donated millions to hospitals and schools. He created scholarships for children from poor families. And he left the Golden Spoon restaurant to its owner. But there was one final gift. Noah received a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of Edward and Daniel sitting at the restaurant. And beside it was a note. It said, "You gave me back my family." Noah cried. Because he finally understood. He had thought he was just a poor boy selling flowers. But one simple question had changed the life of one of the richest men in the world. Years later, Noah became a successful businessman. But he never forgot Edward. He built schools. He supported hospitals. He funded programs for homeless children. And every Friday evening, he returned to the Golden Spoon. He would sit at Edward's old table. And across from him was the same empty chair. Sometimes children would ask him, "Why don't you sit somewhere else?" Noah would smile. And say, "Because someone important used to sit there." One evening, Noah placed a bowl of soup on the empty side of the table. Then he looked at the chair. And whispered, "Thank you." There are people who spend their entire lives trying to become rich. They chase money. They chase success. They chase recognition. But sometimes, the richest person in the room isn't the person with the biggest bank account. Sometimes it's the person who still has enough kindness to share when they have almost nothing. Edward Sterling had billions. But it took a 12-year-old boy with worn-out shoes to teach him what wealth really meant. Because money can buy a house. It can buy a car. It can buy comfort. But it cannot buy back lost time. It cannot bring back someone you've lost. And it cannot replace genuine love. So if there is someone you love, don't wait until tomorrow to tell them. Spend time with them. Listen to them. Be there for them. Because one day, you may have all the money in the world. And still wish you could buy back one ordinary evening. And that is the true meaning of wealth. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Untold Billionaire Stories for more emotional billionaire stories, unexpected twists, inspirational journeys, and powerful life lessons.